today's Women 50 Plus Talk lunchtime session. And I have started this series because as a woman in my 50s, close to 60, and in the work that I do, I became really acutely aware that there's no roadmap for aging, and that it can be a really challenging time of transition and significant change. And the best way I know how to support people through this process is to make sure that there are lots of really great stories out there about pathways and possibilities and opportunities to stimulate thinking and inspire women. So that's why I designed this lunchtime series. What we'll do today is in a moment, I will introduce our guest, Barbara, and I'll be asking her some questions about her career and her major career transition. And then in the last 10 minutes, there'll be the opportunity for any questions that you might have of Barbara. But before we start, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all gathering today. And for me, where I am, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I will be voting yes in the referendum and encourage others to do the same. In getting started today, and I want to just say hello to Thea, because Thea was our first guest a couple of weeks back. So lovely that you could join us today, Thea. And also I want to just acknowledge Lacey, who's, as I said at the beginning, is providing support through this webinar. So this is recorded, and afterwards we'll provide this for the women who have registered and unable to attend today. So in introducing Barbara, I want to tell you a little bit about her first as a bit of a shortcut to the story that she's going to share with us. And she's given me some notes to assist me to do that. And so let me just say that Barbara and I met at the time when she was newly taking on a role in the northwest region of Melbourne. And I was really struck by her story of having previously been a chief operating officer, and prior to that a CEO, and then was taking on a manager's role. So a kind of a step down to what she'd been doing previously. And it always stayed with me. I wonder what sat behind that. I wonder what that was like. And Barbara's really generously agreed to share that story with us today. But to tell you a little bit about her background, she started off in public libraries, where she spent the first part of her career moving into management roles, and then eventually moving into the most senior role in a very large library service. So across that period of time, had the opportunity to kind of learn her trade, move up the ranks, and learn a lot about management, about leadership, about governance, and running a very large organisation. She then took up an executive role at Museum Victoria in 2005, which was a bigger stage for her, but and a really significant opportunity, because it's, as you know, it's quite an iconic organisation and high profile. So there was lots to learn, and she had the opportunity to scale up some other of her skills and try and do some new things. Then after 6 years, she was made redundant, and that was a really difficult time. If any of you have been through that experience, it's really challenging, and it took her some 12 months to recover from that. And during that period, she set up a consulting business that she continued to work in for the next few years. And one of the projects she did at that time was supporting the amalgamation of 3 community health services. And then in the new merged service, she took on one of the executive leadership roles in that organisation, where she worked for some time, and then stepped back out of executive roles into the partnerships manager role at the Northwestern Metropolitan primary health network. And that's where Barbara and I's stories overlap. That's when I met her. And since then, she's spent lots of time in that role and has since moved on and has been doing some other things. And so we'll hear a bit about that today. But the other thing that I think is important to know about Barbara is that she's also had the other sort of stream to her experience has been being on boards, and the most recent one being for the Footscray Community Arts Centre, where she stepped down mid last year to allow kind of room for someone new, fresh and new to come into that role. So Barbara's been really committed to, as you can hear, to public service roles or working in the community-facing sector in government and public health services. So she comes with a particular set of values, as you can imagine, that have served her well through that career. So Barbara, if I could bring you into the conversation at this point, I describe your that transition that you made at that time from COO into or chief operating officer, I've forgotten the exact title, into the partnership management role as a step down in your career, or in your, I guess, the career pathway. How would you describe it? What words would you use to describe that, and what was going on for you at that time?
Yeah, thanks, Sue, and thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And great to see the people in the room. Thank you for joining us too. And can I just also add, vote yes, and that talk to all your friends and family and neighbours and everyone about voting yes and why. It's clearly really important that we do that. So that I think probably I would talk about that also as a step down, but a sort of a deliberate step down. So it's not a step down. There's not a negative connotation to that in terms of what I was aiming to do. In terms of how it actually worked out, that's a different story, as it so often is, but still a lot of positive things about it. So so when I was on the executive at CoHealth, it was as you can imagine, a big job. That's a multi-service site. It's the role included responsibility for buildings, for IT, for finance, for all the sort of operational areas of a big organisation. So I think I noticed that the energy level that I had for the work was shifting. Not all that long before I left. It was an organisation I loved working in, did great work, great people, lots to really love about it. So it was a signal to me that my energy was waning a bit, and that I was tired of having to worry about, if there was a thunderstorm, which buildings were leaking, if there was a cyber attack, was that going to, all of those things that are worries 24/7. I didn't really feel that I wanted to continue doing that. And in thinking about this conversation, chickens and eggs come into it about what's cause and what's effect, because there was that change in my energy in the role, but also life events were happening that also impacted that decision. But which came first, whether the fact that I had my elderly mother needing increasing support and care, and also had, and these are common stories with us, that also grandchildren, so small grandchildren at that stage, and very mindful of the limited time of that, whatever stage the young people in our lives are at. So a bit of a sense of wanting to have more time and energy for some of those other things in how I spent my time. And it's funny, I made a little note here that says financial consideration / mortality, and so there you go, like death and taxes. Anyway, so I think obviously financial considerations come into it, and so being prepared, thinking about the finances and how that's going to work, incredibly important to do that with my partner, you know, as a really significant part of thinking about it. But also, you know, the mortality bit is about, you know, the increasing realization of how close to the end of my life, you know, each day is, and that watching my mother's decline was very confronting, but also very meaningful in terms of thinking about when I'm going to do the things that I want to do with the rest of my life, and what I've got to give to that. So hence looking for a job that I definitely wanted something that was interesting and stimulating and challenging, you know, with enough sort of complexity and the things that I enjoy and that I think I can contribute well on, but that also, you know, didn't require the level of sort of, you know, energy of being in an executive role. So I think that's what I was looking for in making that shift.
Yeah, and so you were 66 at that time?
Yes, I think so. Anyway, that'll do, near enough. But
So around mid-60s.
Yeah, mid-60s, yeah.
And what was it like stepping out at that age to find another job?
Well, I actually, the job had been around for a little while. There'd been, you know, different ways of sort of modelling the job to find it. I talked a lot to the people who were involved in shaping that job and involved in the partnership that it led, and so that gave me a bit of a feel for it and a bit of a sense that, you know, I was seen as someone who could, you know, be a good person in that role. And so that was helpful. I was quite rightly anxious about the stepping down thing. But, you know, I'm a bit of a, you know, glass half full. So it's like, oh yeah, it'll be all right. But I did think about that, and I was fortunate that the executive who appointed me at the PHN actually asked that question in the interview, and that was great because it meant it was, you know, it was averted. It wasn't something that I had to sort of not have the opportunity to talk about in the workplace as well as outside work, and so that was another sort of helpful thing in it. So I did think about it, and I thought about, I suppose the things that I aimed to do was to hang on what were the bigger reasons for doing this that might not be, you know, evident in the day-to-day, whatever the challenges of stepping down were, but that would give me a sense of, this is what I'm aiming for and this is why I'm doing it, so hang in there. Some days that worked, some days it didn't work, needless to say. And I think what I really struggled with is that I'm someone, you know, you can probably, you know, from the sorts of roles that I've had, I'm someone who does like to be what I describe as being at the big table. So in an organisation, in a role where you can, you know, really, it's partly, I think, that I'm a nosy Parker, so you know what's going on across an organisation, but also you can be involved in influencing directions and some of the decisions that, you know, really affect an organisation at a strategic level. That I really enjoy that, and enjoy, you know, seeing the outcomes of that sort of role. So not having that was really hard for me during this change. I did what I could to kind of make up for it by becoming involved in other ways in the organisation, so finding organisation-wide things. So, you know, that was great, and I was supported to do that, and worked on an organisation-wide group to focus on the building the positive culture at the PHN. And that was lots of fun and really interesting, and a way of really engaging with some of those things that do give me satisfaction. There were lots of challenges in the role itself. 18 partners across different sectors in health, but also local government and others. So plenty of challenges there. And I suppose the other thing I wanted to say is that I was quite anxious too about being, my age and moving into a workforce where, at the level I was working in an open plan office with much younger people. And so I was anxious about that. But I have to say, the colleagues that I had there were fantastic. They were inclusive, and I didn't get any sense that I was, an old fart who wasn't worth talking to or dealing with or whatever. And I built some really good friendships and relationships there. And, there were times when, people would come to me to talk about, things that were going on where they might need to problem solve around some of their work, people from unrelated areas. And so that actually worked out well.
So it sounds like you were recognised for your experience by peers and others, and drawn upon. And I also hear really strong self-awareness of the things that are important to you, like the being at the big table, and strategies to find ways of being able to satisfy that part of yourself. What were the what other strategies did you need to draw upon to make this transition work for you?
Yeah, well, I think all the things that we can do around, supportive networks of people, so people who you can trust to, whinge about things and problem solve about things, or just tell you you're okay, all of those things. And whether that's friends and family, whether it's colleagues, whether it's professional counselling and advice of one sort or another. I think another thing, tapping into the sort of the knowledge that is out there. So things like, the Flourish After 50 program that is helping, any information and knowledge that you can build from other resources where people have either shared experience or someone, suggests something that you can read, or, whatever it might be. I think all of those things are the sort of tools that I would use. And as I say, also that sort of giving myself a kick up the bum every now and again about why I'm doing this, that it's not there are reasons for doing it, and I've just got to get on with it. I don't want to sound like it was easy. I don't know if I'm doing that, but it wasn't easy, and it wasn't always enjoyable, but it was what I'd chosen, and it worked. It worked okay for me.
Yeah. So when you how long did you stay in that role for?
I was in that role until, I did write this down because I can never remember these dates. So I started in early 2018 and I left in 2021. And if we think about those years, of course, pandemic. So 2018, 2019, doing the work, the organisation functioning in the way that it was intended to do. And then, of course, early 2020, we suddenly, have COVID hitting and all the uncertainty of that, but also, working with those particular partners in a health context, people weren't focusing on long-term strategic population health planning for good reason, because they were out there, saving lives and, helping people to survive, in their communities and so on. So the focus on that sort of more big picture, long-term work was completely changed. I mean, it was lost, but it was, you know, like for good reason. So I then moved into doing some other strategic project work for the PHN. So some really interesting work with some great people there. But it was not my role. It was sort of I was there using my skills and experience to support stuff, and really interesting work to do around planning for some of the key areas that the PHN operates in, including mental health and you know, sort of the general strategic planning. But yeah, that I was doing it to help out because I had a job and I didn't have, my job wasn't operating. So great to do, but it did mean that by the end of 2021, I had decided that I would finish up rather than try and restart something that was, you know, 2 years before, deal with the uncertainty of the pandemic and so on. So yeah. And I had at least one iron in the fire then about what I'd do next, which was to be part of the Victorian Electoral Commission Senior Executive Officer pool, which is the pool of people who do the, you know, running the electorate offices for the state election last year. And that hadn't yet been finalised that I was selected in the pool, but I thought, you know, chances were that would come off. So I would sort of have something. I wasn't completely letting go of the workforce part of my life. So that was a bit of a safety net, I suppose.
Yeah. So I'm so sorry. My dog is barking. I love animals, pets. So when you look back on that time and having made that decision to make a really significant change to your career and the sort of work that you were doing, how do you think about that now?
I think about it now as probably I would do the same thing again. So if we think about that as would you do it again? Yeah. I probably would. I've thought long and hard about this, particularly, you know, in light of this conversation. I've got a dear friend who is retiring this year and has decided to go cold turkey, like just, you know, stop. And she says that one of the reasons for that is seeing what I did and that she felt it wasn't a positive experience for me, that I maybe it's just that she was one of the people I whinged to a lot. I don't know. So that's been interesting for me to think that's, you know, that's how someone who knows me well saw it. And of course, we're different personalities. I can see it working for her. I think I'm someone who, you know, maybe a bit more sort of gradualist about it and so on. So I think I probably would do it again. In theory, if I, you know, knew then what I know now, I would, I think, be more intentional early on about the strategies to cope with the change. I knew, my head knew that it would be, you know, would have its challenges. But then I didn't actually then think, okay, so what are you going to do when the time comes? The sort of thing that this conversation draws out, like what now I can talk about what I did, but I didn't, that wasn't in my thinking in advance, and maybe that would have been helpful to have done. So yeah, but other than that, by and large, I think I probably would say it worked for me. Yeah, you know, on balance.
Yeah.
But it's not like oh yes, go this. It's more like that's worked out okay.
Yeah. So where would you describe yourself as being at the moment in relation to career and work?
So I am retired. So at the start of last year, which was the year after I finished at the PHN, when I finished, someone rang me the next day and asked me to do an executive executive placement to fill in for a vacancy that they had taken a while to recruit to. And that was with a big international aid organisation, and absolutely fascinating to work there for the first 3 or 4 months of last year. Then we moved into I did go ahead and do the election work. So, so I had a fair bit on, and I was in Tasmania with my partner recovering from the rigours of the state election work when someone rang from that same organisation and asked me to do another stint with them to help out for another few months this year. And that was the really big kind of like the really big moment of, do I do this? Do I want to keep doing the really enjoyable, satisfying work and keep that going? Or do I want to say, well, you've done a lot of thinking about retirement, you've prepared for it, you've thought about it, you've had samples of it, you've tried it out, you've enjoyed it. When you're working, you're thinking about, gardening and, Merry Creek and all the rest of it, and volunteering and so on. So maybe it's time to actually, take a deep breath and say no to this, so that it's kind of like the say no to say yes thing. So say no to that opportunity, which really felt like I was slamming a door in my own face. It really did. It was very confronting and not an easy decision, but I did that, and I'm happy with that. So I'm now, so what is it, 5 months into being retired and thinking of myself as retired, not thinking, well, I'm sort of retired, but I might do some of these other things. That's not to say I wouldn't do something if it came up, but just the balance has shifted to me being, having finished my working life, if that's how it pans out. What am I going to do now? So I'm shaping that now, and I'm sort of feel like I'm getting to a good place, and I'm really enjoying it. So a mix of, more time for things that I want to do, more time for building a bit of a sort of volunteering and engagement portfolio. That sounds terribly, that's pretentious to put it like that, but some different things and different ways of doing that. Having time to go to Pilates and yoga during the day, it's such a luxury. And having time to, when I go and visit my mum, I can go on public transport because I get a walk and I get a bit of sort of outside world, not just hopping in the car and rushing there to get there quickly and get back quickly in the midst of all the other things. So yeah, so it's good. Life is good.
Life is good. That feels like a nice place to pause, and invite questions. And can I just say, it's been really lovely to hear you talk about your transition and the very thoughtful ways that you have kind of moved through your career, and the considerations. And I particularly love that kind of holding the longer term purpose of this job change for you in mind when times were tough, and knowing that you were doing this for good reason for yourself is it's really lovely to hear all of that. And I could see lots of nods around the room while you were talking, so
good. Interested
in opening it up and seeing who would like to ask a question. And the way we've been doing that in previous ones is using the hand in Zoom, so that you can, if you raise your hand, I can see that you've got a question, and we know how many questions there are. And we've probably got the opportunity for 2 or 3 questions. So who would like to go first? Susan.
Thank you. I'll put my hand up. Thank you, Sue, first of all, for convening, and thank you, Barbara, for sharing. It's very generous and quite refreshing, I might say. The question I was thinking about as you were talking is, how do you go from that mindset of being an achiever in your job, doing stuff and getting your satisfaction out of achieving things that are quite measurable in your day? You might have KPIs, you might have specific tasks, you might have things you need to do that you've got to get done in the day. You get to the end of the day and think, right, get done that, on to the next thing. And how you move your mindset to the things like gardening actually are the achievements in your day, and valuing those. as achievement, not necessarily as achievements, but ascribing value to them rather than value to the work?
That's such a great great kind of framing of some of these things. And I have to say, Susan, that the first part of this year I've really been struggling with that. I kind of feel like I'm coming out the end of that, because I am I spend a fair bit of the first couple of months of this year thinking of myself as, you know, lazy and unmotivated, because it's comfortable to rely on those sort of external drivers of what you're doing, isn't it? Like you have to start work at this time, you have to get these things done. So, and then to then shift to somewhere where you can you know, do that for yourself. That sounds a bit pathetic, but you know what I mean. Like, it's like, do all of it for yourself, not just some of it for yourself. And also valuing that. So
And it's okay to do so.
And it's okay to do so. And that, so I have spent probably 3 or 4 months, well, 3 months, I suppose, really working that through, and sometimes being in a slump about it, and then sort of, okay, I've got to pull myself out of that. And so a number of things around, I suppose one of the things is, something that's a bit of I've returned to often in my working life in particular, but also my personal life, is thinking about transitions. And there's a guy called William Bridges who wrote about transitions as having an ending, which is also a beginning, a neutral zone, and then a new beginning. And that neutral zone is the place where you're uncertain, you're anxious, it's not clear what's going to happen. So this is a sort of helps in change management in organizations, but I also sort of reference that in my, okay, so just hang in there with this neutral zone time, because it's also a time of the opportunity. This is when you can shape what happens next. Like, this is when nothing's yet, firm and fixed. So partly thinking about that, and so thinking about, but also actually doing things and just getting on with it and trying it out. It's that thing about trusting myself to give things a go, and if it doesn't work out, then I've got choices about what I do and don't do next. I recognize that one of the things that was not working for me at that stage was I was doing some sort of bits and pieces of some volunteering, but not something which is part of a bigger whole, in the sense of understanding, an organizational sort of setting. So I picked up something like that, which I think is going to work out well. And so, so I think, yes, going through that as a really massive change, but trusting yourself to find a way through it, and, putting the effort into doing that. And also constant reminding that it is okay to, like if I get a book from the library and I think, oh, it'd be nice to read this for a couple of hours, that's actually okay. Like, I've, 45 years in the workforce, it's okay now to put my feet up for a bit from time to time, so long as I don't only do that, which some days I think I'd be tempted to do. Does that help?
No, that's good and interesting. Thank you, Barbara. And I loved your comment earlier also about say no to say yes.
Yeah.
Because you are saying yes to other things. And that's, I think, a good reminder to yourself to say, yes, this is what I've chosen and this is what is of value to me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I love that description of the 3 phases of transition. And there's another author who describes that part in the middle as being the messy middle, and saying that that's where the kind of the reforming is happening, and a bit of because these processes aren't linear, that a bit of the ending creeps in and the new beginning is emerging, and there's this kind of phase, this messy middle, where we're sorting through things. And you've just described that really beautifully, that there are some backwardsing and forwardsing, some good days, but it sounds like progress overall is towards where you want to be.
Yeah, and I think being kind to yourself through any major change process of any kind. I think being kind to yourself is really critical.
Yeah.
Like your comments
and
about
not easy.
in that messy middle and that neutral zone, just sit with it. Just let it. Just let it be.
Yeah.
Give yourself the grace of time to do that.
Grace of time, that's nice.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thea, you asked a question in the chat. What is retirement?
That's, I don't know, you don't want me to answer that, do you, Thea? I think retirement is, I mean, for those of us who are privileged enough to have options about, when we might finish work, the timing of that, the structure of that. I think retirement is what we want it to be. And I think, I've been trying out some different terms for the word retirement, because if you're talking to a group of people at a, party or something like that, and you say you're retired, you see the sort of like the shudders just like, oh yeah, oh, yawn. So I, trying some different terminology for it, and to talk about it as something that is a time of opportunity, and a time of referencing what's in your heart and your head about what you want to do with the precious time that you've got left. And so yeah, let's just do it, girls.
Jeanette, did you have a question?
I did, and thank you, Barb. There is so much in this that is just resonating with me, and also I'm at the PHN, so that's even more, I can sort of scope all. But yeah, so much. But I guess the question I wanted to ask was about your feelings of identity. I know for me, I have been my work for so much of my life. And so part of kind of taking the next steps in life is, well, who am I anymore if I'm not achieving, if I'm not doing this, I'm not that title, where do I, and how do you, and maybe you've covered a little bit about being kind to yourself and things like that, but how do you allow yourself to actually remember it's not your work isn't the whole of you, and how do you, maintain yourself in that situation?
Yeah, I don't know if I've got any answers for that, but I suppose part of when just talking about what is retirement, and I'm a retiree, about how do I articulate that in a way which is about what I have now developed and come to terms with as my identity, which is not whatever my workplace label was, and being prepared to put myself out there as that, rather than being apologetic for it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, I think we are so caught up in work related identities, and for good reason, and me too, but I think finding a way to talk about it that you think does convey something about who you are and who you are now, and why you are that. So the ways of articulating an identity that is, I'm not talking about just what other people think of you, but also about how that means that you're feeling about yourself. So that's at one level. There's a lot more to unpack in that thing about identity, of course, and I think that's where all those sort of support networks and resources are incredibly helpful with that as well.
Yeah, because it's some elements of grief, isn't there, a little bit in that too, of like, well, not only in terms of aging and kind of thinking about that, but just in letting go of the vision that perhaps what you were at 20 and 40 and 50 and like,
absolutely.
So where am I? Who am I now?
That's right. Yeah. And that's that thing of that's kind of the ending bit, if we think about that transitions model. So thinking about that as, well, okay, then that creates opportunities. And I think for me, that moment that I described as me slamming a door in my own face about turning down another work opportunity this year was, for me, that really, what made me so anxious about that was that exactly that identity question, Jeanette. So the question of, well, okay, if I do this, I'm no longer, on this planet as a person with a working life and a work identity. it's massive.
Mm. I have a client who's retiring at the end of this year, and she's decided to give herself a label of untethered and untitled, and, which I just loved.
Yeah.
Because that to me depicts that kind of that middle stage of transition where she's leaving one behind and kind of moving to the other. But I really like, Jeanette, the way you picked up on the grief associated with letting go in this transition phase. And I think, Jeanette, that Barbara's done a really good job of describing some of that and the very gradual nature of that transition for you, Barbara, and the very considered way that you did that has been really well described. So thank you. Are there any final questions before we finish up? Susan, you made a comment. Oh, another word for retirement is prime time.
I love it. Oh, yes. Prime time. That's good.
And it's really interesting because a lot of people who are working in this area are not talking about this phase of life in terms of working or not working. They're talking about it in terms of the life phase. So the third act, for example, is, you might have heard Jane Fonda talking about the third act and how different that is to the first act being childhood and adolescence, the second act being kind of everything in between, and now this period where life's changing again and where each phase is building on the other. But for her, it's not about a work identity, it's really about a life phase identity, or a life phase kind of mindset about what's important at each life phase. I'm going to thank you from Ellen. Thanks for your thanks, Ellen. And
thanks, Ellen.
I think we, if there are no other questions, we'll finish up here. And again, Barb, thank you so much for your refreshing honesty and lovely open story. It's really, this is exactly what this series is about, is being able to let other women see how pathways that are available and get insights from others' experience, and you've done that beautifully. So thank you, and thank you for all of you for joining us here today. If you want to know more about Flourish After 50, you can find me at flourishafter50.com.au, and otherwise we'll be back here next Friday with our last one for the May series, Sandy, who's going to be talking about again, she's working at an executive level, but her transition is midstream, where she's putting more time into board work at the moment and building out that kind of portfolio career. So she's got an interesting story to tell as well, and I'd love you to join me. So thank you, and we'll say farewell for this Friday lunchtime.